Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session on industrial ecology. It is organized by Share Screen Africa. My name is Diane. I'm based here in Rwanda. I'm going to be your host tonight for this insightful and exciting session. I'm part of Share Screen Africa team. So today's topic, like I had mentioned, is life cycle thinking and application, and is going to be presented by a distinguished guest speaker, Zeiba Voile. When we talk about, in general, when we talk about conservation, we usually picture protecting forests, wildlife, and oceans, and even other water bodies in general. But conservation also includes the materials and the products we use in every single day, in our daily life. And I want you to think about some of the mobile phone. And I know probably some of you are joining using your mobile phones. What happens to them once they get old to the use? Or the plastic bottles or the plastic cups we use for drinking from? Where do they end up after we throw them away? That is exactly what life cycle thinking helps us understand the full journey of a product from when it's made to when it is used or when it's finally discarded. It's a challenge to us to think about. As conservationists, we can design and use things in ways that we can be reused, and so as even to reduce the harm to the nature. Can waste become a new resource instead of ending up in the landfills? This is a concept that is closer to circular economy, which is an interesting topic that I love, which works a lot like nature. When nothing goes to waste and everything gets reused, recycled, or regenerated to support the system as a whole. So as we move through the presentation, I would like also to invite everyone to reflect and share in the chat box. What is one product in your daily life that you think could have a better or a long life cycle if it was reused or redesigned? So use the chat box. I would love to see people popping up some interesting ideas on their products, they think that could be reused or redesigned in the long run. And by the end of this session, we are going to be able to identify as key learning outcomes, we're going to be able to identify opportunities and challenges in applying life cycle management and circular economy principles to understand how life cycle approaches enable circular resource efficient system. And thirdly, apply life cycle thinking in organization strategies, distinguish between life cycle management and life cycle analysis and life cycle thinking. And lastly, to conduct and interpret life cycle analysis for better decision making in organization. Like I've presented to you, we have in the room our distinguished guest speaker, Zeibeda. Is a high respected leader in sustainability and resource efficiency. She has been recognized as South Africa's first female resource efficient expert and the driving force behind the Green Thread initiative, which has helped many companies turn circular economy ideas into a real sustainable action. So without further ado, Zayveda, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I believe that you guys are from a background of industrial, well, not industrial ecology, but rather environment. My background is chemical engineering as an undergrad, and I have an MBA in environment, which is basically around sustainability. I've worked with companies for since 2001. So that is 24 years of working with different types of companies all over the globe, mainly in South Africa, focusing on how these companies can actually become more efficient in their processes. And it's quite interesting because everybody always likes to think that environment is on this side and business is, way over here and there's no cross-cutting. But that's not the case. In the recent years, in the past 10 years or so, companies have been under a lot of pressure to improve and to look at sustainability overall and things like industrial ecology, which all forms part of sustainability, and to work more efficiently with their resources, with their raw materials, because everything comes from nature, right? It looks at non-renewable resources. There's renewable resources, which you guys have obviously got a very good handle on of what is renewable and non-renewable. At the end of the day, it's companies have a responsibility to, and as part of an integrative society, and they have a responsibility to become much more efficient in their operations, so that it doesn't only impact our local environment, it also impacts the global environment. So there's different types of impacts that we will then cover through the life cycle analysis process. Let me just open this up. And so life cycle, so Diana explained very not quickly, but very thoroughly the idea behind what the life cycle thinking and applications lecture is today. We will have a natural break probably within an hour or so, or maybe a bit earlier. I do welcome that everybody, if you want to share any comments or anything like that, you're welcome to do that in the chat or also by show of hand or something like that, because I do want some interaction, obviously. I'm only available to you for the next 2 hours, so take advantage of that. And if you don't understand something, by all means, we can have a discussion. I'm very open to not only listening to my own voice for 2 hours. Let's move on. So I have just Oh, and I want to obviously share LCA, thank Shell LCA, and also thank Screen Africa for the opportunity to present today to you guys. And then also to meet new partners in Africa is always interesting to see what's happening in other parts of Africa and the different regions as well. So the agenda today is introduction sustainability, which you guys have probably know a lot about. So I'll try to go through it, but to make sure that you, if there's any questions again, make sure that you ask any questions, any concerns, nothing is clear or something like that, please raise your hand or just try to, I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself with Stella and you guys on board, if you can just alert me because I won't be able to see anything like that if there are any questions in the audience. And then we'll look at life cycle thinking as part of sustainability to understand why is it important, what is the concept of cradle to grave, and what is the reason for this type of thinking. And I mentioned that a lot of my work is focused on different manufacturing industries, commercial buildings, from malls to schools to looking at mines and applying the same type of concept in terms of how do companies actually become more efficient in terms of water, energy, waste, in terms of the different resources that they're using. And obviously this impacts their local environment. And then now broadening up, not only working with these companies in silos, but then trying to look at the entire value chain of a specific product and service. With that specific product and services, what are the different impacts from raw materials acquisition right up until end of life, as Diana mentioned? And we'll then apply that in different types of tools. And these tools are not for you to go away and be able to become experts in LCA, in product environmental footprinting, digital product passports, eco-labeling. These are just some of the tools that are being used out there in terms of life cycle applications. They are, it's the idea is for you to understand it because life cycle analysis is not going to go away. It is the new type of way companies are actually being measured and trying to identify different types of environmental impact and trying to identify improvement opportunities for these organizations and for the products and services itself, right? And then at the end, we'll can close off with a discussion and a summary. So the introduction, and this is something that was already mentioned, integrating lifecycle management, LCA, lifecycle thinking, was to be able to explore how the products and services can be designed, produced, used, and disposed of in ways. So we don't only look at it from one aspect, from the manufacturing side, we look at the entire feasibility from raw materials right up until end of life of this product itself or service, and we try to, and I'll give you case studies and examples as we go through it. And how can the LCA thinking actually be applied in all different types of applications in different sectors? And then we'd obviously try to integrate that with circular economy, which you've already probably touched base on. I'm just, if you haven't, I can do an explanation around that. Okay, and you've given an introduction. I'm not going to go through all of that still. So sustainability, what is sustainability? Have anybody seen this three triple bottom line? Three P's: people, planet, profit. By show of hands, I can't see the classroom so well, but you guys have heard of sustainability? Yes? Yes? No? Scream out to me if you can. Yes, they have. So that's good. So for me, if I am a company right now, I can tell you that it's not easy to operate a company in this day and age in 2025 versus 25 plus years ago, right? If you were in the 90s or the early 2000s, it was a little bit easier to operate because you did not have the same type of stakeholders. Right now, people are asking more and more questions. You, as a consumer, you'd go out and you'd look at the product and you say, what impacts does this have? Is it carcinogenic? Does it have any cancer causing chemicals? Does it have any impacts on my health? If I'm pregnant, will it impact me? What is that smoke? If I drive past a company, I see, oh, there's smoke coming out of the stack. It's white smoke, but it seems concerning. Maybe I should phone the company up and figure out. So this is what people are starting to do more and more. And for this reason, before in the early 2000s and 1990s, people were like, okay, well, they could just operate the way they wanted to, right? If anybody watched Industrial Revolution, watched a show of history, or even Winston Churchill back in London, you would see that there were times where they would actually produce or industrialize to such an extent, and there was so much coal being used. There was days that people couldn't come out. In the 60s, they couldn't come out in London because the smog was so thick, right? And this is the amount of industrialization that was actually taking place. So people started becoming concerned and say, okay, how much coal? What is the impacts of coal? What is the impacts of this chemical? What types can it be reused? Can it be reduced? How are we impacting our neighbors, our residents? And therefore, companies have much more stakeholders and they have much more pressure around them to then become responsible to these stakeholders and then to communicate to these stakeholders. Therefore, you have this triple bottom line, which is understandably a journey. It's not necessarily if you get to a certain point, there's always ways and means of improvement for organizations. So the triple bottom line is people, planet, profit. And I look at it and I always tell people it's like a juggler, right? You have three balls in the air and you're trying to juggle this and you're trying to keep all of them in the air at the same time. You're trying to make sure that it's completely integrated into your organization, that you make sure that your people, the assets, which is your staff, for example, they are looked after, that it's not a hazardous environment, that they have the proper PPE, the proper protective clothing that they're wearing, that they're not exposed to chemicals, ammonias or anything like that, carcinogens in your environment, in their working environment. And that you're looking after the planet, that you're utilizing as little virgin materials as possible, that you're utilizing perhaps recycled fabrics or fibers or raw materials where you can. You're trying to reduce your impact on the environment. At the same time, you're also trying to make money. And so these things, all of these aspects up in the air, being integrated into your organization, it's not very easy. And that's why I always say I take my hat off to people that owns manufacturing industries. It's quite brave in this day and age. Let me move on. So sustainability. So there's a few myths over the next few slides I'll go through. Sustainability is not just about the environment, right? So sustainability includes a broad global, or rather group, social, economic, and economic development issues. And I mentioned that you're looking at things like poverty, hunger, health, education, much more broader than that. For example, I can give you a company that we worked with out in KZN in South Africa. This company, something as simple as they would have flash floods in that area. And what happened was, because of the flash flooding, the storm's water drains would actually be completely clogged up. And they would be completely flooded in that area. Their workers couldn't come to work because you couldn't even get into the company. You couldn't even cross those roads because there was so much water around. So this is the impact of climate change, and the impact of, flash floods wasn't known to be common in that area. And because of that, the company actually loses production time. They lose the employees, can't work for 1 or 2 days, things like that. So all of this it's interrelated, and it has knock-on effects. So we think, sustainability is there. This is environment. This is economy. This is, education, energy, sanitation. It's all actually integrated, and we have to take care of all of this, right? So this requires giving all countries access to natural resources such as water, energy, and food. So overarching sustainability, this is from the perspective of a global perspective where you have SDGs in place, all of which, come in one or other way from the environment. So say sustainability again is not just about the environment. It has transformed into an environmental term, and we spoke about the people, planet, profit. If too many of us use resources inefficiently or generate waste too quickly for the environment to absorb and process, future generations won't be able to meet their needs. So this is very common. So I don't know if any of you, again, have you heard of the Earth Overshoot Day by show of hands, or just screaming again? You've heard of Earth Overshoot Day? No, yes, yes, no. So what it says is that by a certain date in that year, that we've actually theoretically used up all the resources for that amount of time. And what it says is every year it becomes earlier and earlier. So it used to be like, okay, we have sufficient resources. So to sustain us this would be the amount, and some sort of statistical model, right? And you can look it up on the internet. It's called Earth Overshoot Day. And it clearly shows that the more and more years go on, this Earth Overshoot Day becomes earlier and earlier, where we would need, technically, like they say, another planet to survive, and another planet in terms of those resources that is available to us, we would then need to. And this is the amount of consumption, that's actually production consumption, that's taking place. And if we continue on that route and continue to do that, we would ultimately run out of resources, right? And the future generations, our grandchildren, our kids, whatever, they won't have the same available resources to them that we have, and less, and in a different format. So today's sustainability agenda was also formed a lot around COVID-19, and the impact of that social and ecological agenda influence the businesses. So that was a disruptor in companies as well. Political urgency for companies to look at sustainability. And I can speak from from South Africa, and then from a global level as well, that we do obviously have a fair amount of policies in place to ensure that companies look at the environment. We also have what is the carbon tax levy. We've got extended producer responsibility. We've got many other things that people are now looking at, and to ensure that they become more efficient. And then there's also high reputational risk. So H&M, for example, couple of years ago, they would say that where we are, they have an infrastructure where you can give back your clothes, and you get a certain amount of money back for your clothes. And these are old clothes, right? And you get a discount on any future purchases that you make with H&M. What happens is that they took that and they said, okay, yes, we recycle these fibers. And someone actually started tracking this process, and to say, is this clothing actually being recycled, as H&M clearly claims? And ultimately, there was some sort of disruption somewhere where it wasn't the case, and H&M got a bit of a bad rap based on that. So this is what companies are wanting and needing to be much more transparent as what they used to be. They need to report on not only what happens with their products, when it leaves their facilities, but also what happens with their products ultimately before that as well. Wow, the raw materials, they need to understand this. They don't only have the responsibility of what's happening in the manufacturing side, but also beyond the scope of where they are operating. And this is the concept of extended producer responsibility. And Dieselgate, you might have heard of as well, which is looking at where VW actually they lowered the amount of emissions reported for carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, and it was also found that it was untrue. And again, they lost some sales based on that. And this was actually a global scandal, but much more companies risk, their reputations if they do not operate within the confines of being more transparent, showing credibility, and also being more responsible when it comes to the environment. So clients, also consumers and suppliers are starting to become much more sustainable, and they choose more sustainable and locally grown uh, produce. I'm sure in your areas, in our area specifically, people are looking at much more sustainable organic types of fruit and local produce, and they want to know where's the shoe made from, who's actually making it. Is it someone within Lesotho, someone here, someone in Bangladesh? People are asking those types of questions, and because of this consumer pressure, sustainability has become obviously on the forefront of everybody's lips. And these are the SDGs. Also from a global perspective, it's always worthwhile to go back to the SDGs. Many countries are signatories to this, and it has 17 SDGs in place. And a lot of the agendas, when it comes for companies as well, actually looks at, has these as overarching umbrellas. So you'll have, for example, gender equality, which is also integrated into sort of a just transition framework. You've got everything affordable and clean energy, which is quite critical, looking at obviously water and sanitation, climate action, responsible consumption and production, sustainable cities and communities. That is something that you would also learn from in terms of eco-industrial parks in the next lecture. Okay, and then this is just our environmental challenges, which I think you guys are also very much in your region. What is the biggest environmental challenge that you are currently facing? So we've got water scarcity, we've got air pollution, land degradation, waste being an issue for many, many years because no one wants another landfill site. Have you ever visited a landfill site, any of you? Yes, no? It's a very good site visit to do one day. And it's interesting just to see this is where all your things end up in terms of dump sites and stuff like that. But worthwhile to go visit a landfill site just to see, where's everything. And it gives you quite a scary view of the world going forward. So as a site visit, I think it's quite important. And if you are in the environmental field. Water scarcity is something that we face within South Africa. We even had day zero where we were going to have like no water being supplied because we had months and months of very, very little rainfall. Air pollution, this is because we are still a very coal heavy and our energy mix is still dependent on coal. That is changing obviously through the years. Land degradation and soil erosion, mining impacts, which is huge, and that goes right through Africa in terms of the impacts of mining and irresponsible mining. Let me go just pause this. We can come back to this. And in sustainability and green, we mentioned green concepts tend to focus on technologies, products, and causing less harm to human health and the environment. In popular discourse, it is often assumed that green is equal to natural as opposed to artificial. So what I get is that people tend to come to me and immediately say, well, if you are sustainability, then you're definitely looking at only environment, things like that. But it's not the case, it's overarching, but also that green is looking at conservation only. Okay, sustainability and green overlap, since a sustainable solution has to preserve obviously the health and the environment, right? Sustainability adds to the important idea of preserving resources for the next generation. We spoke about that extensively. Um, and then the next slide shows that both terms are often used outside of context, outside of true metric, right? So going green, people tend to say, okay, we're going green because um, we need to ensure that we have some sort of face of the market, that we are a company that's environmentally responsible. But this can also produce some sort of greenwashing identification. People could look at it from an aspect of greenwashing and trying to say, well, if you are green, what are you actually doing about the environment? So, a quick question again, a group discussion. We need to ask, is recycling sustainable? So this is an interesting question because this is something that I get faced with all the time when I go into companies. I ask them, okay, so what are you doing in terms of sustainability and being responsible in your organization? And they say, no, we recycle. Here is our bill, and we get money back for plastics, and we get money back for our paper and whatever. So question to you, is recycling sustainable? Hi, how are you? Okay, very quickly. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
You can go ahead.
Recycling can be sustainable, but it depends on what you do. Uh, when you recycle, you conserve natural resources. This, this reduces the need to extract new materials. Hence, it's sustainable. It also saves energy, like producing new products requires a lot of energy. So when you recycle, we use less energy. Hence, it's also sustainable. Reduces waste and pollution. Yeah, this one is the last one. Uh, when we recycle, we reduce waste and we minimize waste since we use the already available materials, hence reducing waste. I think that's it.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Thank you so much. Monica, eh? You said Monica? Um, yeah, thank you so much. It was very good.
My argument agrees that recycling is indeed sustainable on the fact that it conserves natural resources. Recycling reduces the amount of virgin natural materials that will be extracted from the environment. Another point is on economic and employment benefits. For those guys that will be getting together the materials that needs to be recycled, that's a job for them in which they will earn a living. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. That was impressive. I think that you guys have really thought about it. And I do agree, recycling can be as quite a bit of sustainability impacts. And, that shows that you guys have thought, oh, another group, sorry. So I'll just limit it to this to three. And then I don't want to go on. Otherwise, we're going to take a lot of time. But thank you. Continue.
Recycling is really sustainable because if we recycle it helps in conserving the natural resources just because if we use the already used materials, it means we reduce the over extraction of the natural resources. And it also helps in regarding the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. For example, if we use the trees to make papers, it means we have saved the forest. So forestry helps in trapping the greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide from being released into the atmosphere. Yeah.
So we'll limit it to that. But thank you. I mean, each one of you guys gave a very good reason why recycling is actually sustainable, I would say. In the long term, in the short term, I think it's important. Do we want to continue, or I want to continue with my slides? Otherwise, we're going to go. We'll give you an opportunity just to speak as well. Otherwise, we're going to take a lot of time.
Recycle, recycling is sustainable because it reduces the amount of, it reduces the composition. Once more waste are reused, then the amount of waste to be managed, it will be amount of waste to be managed. Instead of to use more money in managing those wastes, then we will use it. Then recycle also is sustainable because it reduces the waste to be imposed in landfills or incineration. Yeah, since more waste are reused. And also, I can say it indeed sustainable since it reduces the greenhouse gases. As we know, when the process of when the wastes are at its position where it is where it needs to be corrected by the government or by the government or country.
Okay.
I can say there is some processes such as organic processes where carbon dioxide, methane, and the other substances are produced, which can harmful our environment by raising temperature, which is a condition known as global warming.
Okay, thank you so much. So yes, that would be the end of our discussion for that. But I do agree it is sustainable, but I'll unravel why I think, it's not the highest priority. So what we need to focus on is that recycling is important. It's one of the important aspects of managing waste and managing resources. It does reduce the amount of virgin material and natural resources required. However, it's not the only option and it shouldn't be the first option. So that's my opinion. And we've had participants saying that, you're obviously saving energy, and you can see there the table on the right hand side shows you the amount of energy is actually saved if you utilize the different types of material in terms of recycling that. What I want to add is that when it comes to recycling, a lot of people would think, okay, I can just recycle this. I've been into companies where they have plastic products, for example, and they would say, well, we don't need to use this if this product is a reject product, there's some sort of flaws on it. It can't be sold as first, then we can put it back into the system. So what they do is they take the plastic product itself, whether it be a plastic chair or other products made out of plastic, they would then put it through a regrinder, which chops it up into small little bits, and then the regrinder would then put it back into the process, melt the plastic, and then you produce the same type of product ultimately. However, this is not necessarily the best option for the company, because now the company is going to waste more energy, more water, more electricity. So in that situation, it's not necessarily the best case, right? It makes more sense to then produce the product in the first place. So we'll go, this is just your recycling rates. You guys can have a look at it later on, but I'm sure in your country you would know what the recycling rates are. It's very much European centric. We should get more in South Africa. I'm not sure what the rates are currently, but yes, it goes up to 50-60% in some countries. And then this is what I wanted to focus on, is that Recycling is here at the bottom, as you can see, all right, but in terms of improving in terms of priority and increasing in the better for circularity, you would have to not want the waste in the first place. That's what I try to tell people. Try to have a product where you don't have that much waste, so you try to reduce your waste or your outputs ultimately, and then you have very little to manage. Right? A lot of companies would say if they have a steel manufacturing or they're producing something out of metals, they don't mind having scrap waste from the product. There might be a foundry and they have these off-cut waste pieces from steel. What they would do is they'd sell it because they get they get a good value for that. But if you think about it from a business perspective, it doesn't make sense because you would pay us X amount of money per square meter of the steel, and then when you get your money for recycling for your scrap, you won't get the same value. So you are actually losing money. And people think, oh no, but we are making a lot of money, it's still high value, and. So ultimately, try to reduce your waste as far as possible. So rethinking, refuse, reduce, that's the highest priority, right? And then you can look at internal reuse wherever possible. Can it be reused internally? Can you repair the product? Where you can, and we spoke about, for example, the regrinding. Can you do refurbishment of the product itself, restore an old product and bring it up to date? Can you remanufacture, use parts of a discarded product, and then also produce it into a new product? Repurposing the product, maybe that's discarded. A lot of companies in industrial symbiosis, they actually exchange to other companies and they say, well, what is a raw material to me? I get the boxes from the supplier from China, and these boxes are, what can I do with these boxes? Now I take out my raw materials and I produce a garment, for example. Then I have these box waste. Do I throw the boxes away? I can maybe reuse it and send it to my clients as well. So you can repurpose as much as you can. And then ultimately there at the bottom is recycling and recover. But also treatment is the lowest priority, like incineration, landfilling. That should be the last priority when it comes to having your waste. So you try to reduce waste, and by waste I mean it can be solid waste, raw materials, all sorts of resources, but we also have to look at water, gaseous waste. If you're in a company, if you've ever been in a company, you'll find there's maybe heat coming off. That's also waste, right? Energy waste, lights being on in facilities where there's nobody there, a lot of storage facilities, people put their lights on all the time. There's no one that needs the lighting. So simple things like that. And these are wastes looked upon as waste streams as well. So sustainability and expenses, basically money. More sustainable ways of doing things usually cost less over the lifetime. So what I wanted to say was, in our region, we used to buy maybe and put up solar because of load shedding. Solar at the moment is much cheaper than what it was 5, 10 years ago. And because of the demand that actually has increased over a period of time. So it's become much more feasible and economic for companies to actually put this up. So having a more sustainable opportunity or option improvement area in your facility doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to cost you much more. Ultimately, when I go to some tourist facilities, I ask them, are you saving money? They say, yes, for sure. We're not using off-grid electricity, and the electricity produced from these solar PV panels are actually much, much less compared to paying the municipality for electricity. Okay, so sustainability and expenses. I would just quickly go through this. So developing new technology sometimes comes with risk. Exactly with, you've heard of green hydrogen being produced right now. Everybody's on the talk of green hydrogen. And this is now in the process of, if you look at the lifespan of how to produce innovative or manufacture innovation and processes, you'll see that they are looking at different types of prototypes, right? It's sort of in the mid phase, and it's still very expensive to have hydrogen cells. Some of the biggest motor companies in the world, like Toyota and that, has actually took it upon themselves to look at and to research further how they can look at hydrogen cells. And the focus has moved a little bit away from EV electrical vehicles. Okay, and so this goes with time, and the upfront costs are obviously expensive, but with time, there's more funders, government gets involved, researchers, and eventually the product becomes the higher demand and becomes more cheaper when there is feasibility in place. So we'll go through the life cycle thinking now, and just to give you the show on the right-hand side, the picture on the right-hand side shows that we're looking at cradle to gate, cradle to grave, and cradle to cradle, hopefully. And we'll explain all of that. Cradle to cradle is basically from, like I said, from the beginning right to the end of the life of the product. So many companies produce in this way, right? We have a raw material extraction coming in, and we can use the example of the cell phone that Diana used. The cell phone comes in. What is actually being used in the cell phone? What are the different products being raw materials? These are lots of little metals, and the metals come from where? It comes from mines, right? Or it comes from e-waste recycling. There's gold, there's different, very, very specific types of metals in cell phones. Then there's obviously some sort of production, which is production means the facility that actually manufactures it. And then you distribute, you take the cell phones. And the cell phones, I don't know if in your area cell phones are being produced, but in South Africa, we don't really have cell phone manufacturers. I think we mostly import the cell phones from China and abroad, and that's where the assembly actually takes place. But then if you think about it, the raw materials come from Africa, it goes to that region, so it gets shipped there, it comes back here, they sell it to us, it gets distributed and then consumed, and ultimately it ends up either being passed down from person to person, and eventually it ends up being on our landfill sites, right? It becomes disposed of. So you use it for a fair amount. When you use it, you have electricity that's being used. If you have a product such as clothing or something, you would then wash it. Energy being used for that. Water being used. Chemicals also used. In this case of the cell phone, obviously, it's just electricity, energy being used to charge your phone. And then you actually dispose of it eventually. So throughout this entire process, there's a loss of value that takes place. And people realize, well, this is a very linear way of thinking. And this is how, for example, if you have an iPhone, every year iPhone gets upgraded from 20 Max, 30 Max, Pro Max, I don't know. Right? And everybody wants the new iPhone, and it costs so much money. And at the end of the day, you can imagine how much actually goes into the extraction of these materials, who actually takes back and does it actually. For example, we have e-waste recycling in South Africa. If you have a laptop, then you can take it back to certain facilities and they would actually dismantle it. But it doesn't take place throughout in every country, right? What happens in the Netherlands or Germany doesn't necessarily happen here. They would say, okay, bring it back to us, and we would actually dispose of this responsibly. And we would then be able to maintain and to capture all the raw materials that can be recycled and then refurbished back into a new product. This doesn't take place everywhere. For us, maybe some of our e-waste actually ends up on landfill. Then there's some chemicals taking, leaching on the landfill, and then it goes down to the ground. So again, we're focusing and we realize that these are environmental impacts that we have on our local environment, right? So this is all the more reason why we have to go towards a circular economy. And life cycle thinking is, again, the entire life cycle, but it also encompasses circular economy, making sure that it's not the take, make, waste type of thinking, that it now looks at more responsible ways of trying to close that loop, right? If you're drinking Coca-Cola, for example, Coca-Cola would then say, okay, you drink the Coca-Cola, what happens to the bottle? Can you return that bottle to us? You can then send the bottle back and they give you a deposit and they say, okay, the deposit is good and we can actually recycle this bottle and we can maintain control of recycling it and we produce a new bottle, right? many of the soft drinks companies also do that. So this is again how you can look at more of a circular way of where it doesn't end up in landfill site. And like I mentioned again, landfilling, incineration, and treatment of waste is ultimately the last option. We have to look at all the other R's, which is the highest priority is not to have the waste in the first place, reduction of the waste, reuse internally wherever you can. Recycling and recover is also on that list. But to throw away just to a landfill site, throw it in the bin, doesn't get recovered in any way, or some parts doesn't get recovered, is not the best option for the product and not for the environment either, right? We are using again extracting more and more materials to actually produce new products. And if we can refurbish or maintain the products as long as we can, in South Africa, we have a jacket, for example, that is the KY jacket. And when you take this jacket back and it has a tear or a rip in it, the company would actually fix it for you. And they would say, well, we can give you this at a cost. But then also at the end of the day, your jacket lasts years and years because it's such a good quality product itself. So this is the reason is that we need to increase the longevity of the products. We need to increase the quality so that the products actually last much longer. If you ask your grandparents, they will tell you there were certain products that they had that would never, they had toasters that wouldn't break. They would have, nowadays we have to replace kettles and irons and all sorts of appliances every 2 years. We have hot water geysers every other year. We have to replace it. Because it's not made in the same, not just sustainable, but it's not made with very good quality and with length, because it's made to obviously for us to consume as much as we can. So the circular economy is the only way for companies to go, and life cycle thinking and life cycle tools is the way to then analyze how you can optimize the circular economy. So if you don't understand the product itself, you don't understand what the impacts are, you wouldn't know where to actually focus on this entire value chain. So eco-innovation is also a tool that can be used, but this is more of a business strategy. Before we actually go into life cycle analysis and life cycle thinking. So green product innovation is also a tool that focuses not only on the product itself, but also on the strategic overview from a business model perspective. And I give you this because this is touches on not only focusing on the environmental side, but if you are a business person, for example, you'll try to identify how can life cycle thinking be integrated into my business. And by that, you are going beyond technical improvements only. So what I've mentioned to you was what would you actually do within your facility to improve recycling, to improve recovery, to have better products, to have more environmentally sustainable products itself. What type of strategic thinking do you have to have in place, and how can you actually then work with those value chain operators, with all the different types of suppliers, which is downstream, and then also your clients and your consumers, which is further upstream. So the key elements is the 3 dimensions, which is people, planet, profit, life cycle thinking, business strategy and modeling, and then value chain operation. So these are just elements which you would take forward as a business person. So this is the perspective of a business manager, for example, or someone that owns a company. You're not only going to do life cycle analysis, which is something someone does for you, but it's also trying to integrate that type of thinking into your business model. If you know what the strategy is of the organization, to try and identify who you can work with, what are your stakeholders, and how you can actually improve that. Right, so it's basically around value chain. The value chain is comprised of all the activities that provide or receive value from designing, making, distributing, retailing, and consuming the product itself. So you can see there the graphic on the right-hand side shows you the supply chain, which is basically raw materials, manufacturing, and then distribution and retail. And the entire value chain is the whole thing, from supply chain, including the life cycle, including the way the consumer consumes. So once again, the cell phone, the cup, the drink, soft drink, whatever food product, and then ultimately what goes to waste. So this is the entire value chain, which includes economic and social value. So we have to constantly think about not only what happens at one point, not only at your consumer, we have to focus on all of these aspects. So life cycle thinking, how do we move to more circular and green product innovation? By understanding the impact of the product. And this is what I'm trying to say is that life cycle analysis, which is the tools that are being used now, and it's tools that we've used within our organization, life cycle analysis and product environmental footprinting, which has some form of modeling in place. And this is actually using software to identify where are the impacts of the product. Okay, life cycle thinking is about thinking of a product or services to include all of the different impacts, those three areas we spoke about. And then the main goals of LCT are to reduce a product's resources. So you now try to focus on where can you ultimately reduce the product's resource use. So recycling was one of those areas where you can do improvements. For what can you do to actually reduce your carbon emissions, what you can do to reduce your water consumption throughout the life cycle of the product. And so ultimately you have a lower environmental impact. Right? And again, I'm just wanting to drive home the concept of life cycle thinking. And this has got to do, and I mentioned that we have a lot of the raw materials in our region, which goes to beneficiation. We have, for example, wool that comes from South Africa. We have people that actually produces wool products and wool textiles, but they actually buy their wool from Brazil. So yeah, many things doesn't make sense when it comes to product chains and value chains. If you actually follow how things, and you can imagine the amount of shipping. Shipping has, if you're transporting back and forth, it is known that it impacts and there's higher carbon emissions related to that, right? Because of the fuel usage. So it makes more sense. We worked with a university in Kenya, and they were doing life cycle analysis on different products there. And they told the company, listen here, for you to actually improve your systems, you have to reduce your greenhouse gases, greenhouse gas emissions. And they started using, not instead of shipping, they used more better planning and have more local supply in place. So globalization of product chains is critical impact on the life cycle thinking, increasing competitive pressure, and global stakeholders also on the watch. So we have to look at how does this products actually get made? Can we produce it more locally? It makes more sense to have local production, and it has lower impacts on the environment if you do it actually locally, if you beneficiate locally. I know within Ghana, for example, they have these I think one of the highest producing cocoa places in Africa, not in Africa, I think in the world. And they were sending all of this cocoa to Europe, and then they were beneficiating there and making obviously very good quality chocolate. And the Ghanaian government decided to do the beneficiation and to have more control over the supply chain of that cocoa products itself, of the raw materials. So that makes much more sense, right? It's not only better for the environment, but also it gives us jobs. It has better economic value. And this is the continued way that we need to think about sustainability that actually has much more of a positive impact on our regions. And so it's not just about environment, but it's also improving the livelihoods of many, many people in the local area where the raw materials are being grown or actually being extracted.